I just knew that there was someone that needed to hear those words, that the book of your life isn't closed. Just turn the page to your next miracle. Access your faith and grab hold, because the truth is that you win. Well, good morning, good afternoon, Celebration Spiritual Center. How are we feeling? How are we being? We're good? All right. Well, we're going to take this energy and we're going to share a little bit of truth. I have a few things to talk about today. And as most of you know, we are in our series, God Power, and we started in week 1 with a profound idea, the topic, Stop Begging God. And we used 2 different sources. We used Ralph Waldo Emerson and we used Lao Tzu. And I love that verse from Lao Tzu. Does the Lord of a great empire go out begging for rice? When we understand who and what we are, we won't beg for anything. And what Ralph Waldo Emerson says is that when we understand that we are one with God, we won't beg. Because the only reason we would ever beg is because we think we're separate from this thing that we call God. We think that we're separate from the source of all life, of all good, of all power. Last week was a interesting topic, healing your God trauma. Recognizing that many times the reason that we're unable to access this God power, that is the power that operates in, through, and as all life, is because we actually have some God trauma. Right, we have some issues. It could be if you're African American, and I shared a piece from a pastor in Ghana that talked about this idea that, you know, as Africans who received Christianity, one of the issues is that the Christianity that was received, all of the depictions of God and Jesus were white. And so while you may believe in Christianity, there's this disconnect of, yeah, but I'm still not good enough because the deities don't look like me. And of course, we can also look at women who continue to see the masculine presence deified and placed before the feminine presence, and continuing to hear God spoken of as male, although there are pieces in the text, which I highlighted in the Bible specifically, where we hear God personifying itself as mother, as a woman. And of course, in the book of Proverbs, Sophia, which is wisdom, and she is there over and over again, but these texts are not highlighted. And so then it is ostracized, all of the women of the planet not being able to see the divinity within themselves. And then, of course, we have the trauma that was created through the Salem witch trials, which was basically a way to say that any form of power, any form of magic, if you will, that is demonstrated by a woman is somehow wrong or evil. And so there's trauma that has taken place because of those events, and we need to heal that in order to be able to know and come to this full understanding that we are one with God. I encourage you to go to YouTube or to the New Thought channel, and you can watch or rewatch those messages. But we're moving on. So this week, I found myself doing something that I love. First of all, I love T-shirts. Y'all probably know that. Like, my T-shirt game, my T-shirt game is serious, right? I just bought a new Black Panther shirt. It's going to arrive in a couple days. And so I was on Etsy this week looking for a specific shirt. Have y'all seen that meme that says birthplace, earth, race, human, politics, freedom, religion, love? Have you seen that meme? You're right. You know, it kind of surfaces all around. And so I want a T-shirt with that. And unfortunately, on Etsy, I didn't really find anything that just spoke to me. You know, the words were there, but the design just wasn't cool. So I think I'm going to have to probably design my own, which is all good. But as I was doing that search, I found my mind being a minister. You know, somebody said, my dad, we were talking, of course, he's also a minister. And he was talking to a woman who said, yeah, I don't like to have conversations around ministers because everything you say becomes a sermon. So, so I found myself looking for this T-shirt, and then my mind just really zeroed in on this, my religion is love. And I was like, oh, there's something there, right? And actually where it began to take my mind was to an old Negro spiritual, Have You Got Good Religion? And have you got good religion? It's a call and response, right? And so normally the leader is asking that question, have you got good religion? And the singers are responding back, certainly, Lord. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord, right? And there may be other questions depending on which version of the song. Do you love everybody? Certainly, Lord. Has your name been changed? Certainly, Lord. Have you been converted? Have you been to the water? Have you been baptized? Certainly, 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 Lord. And of course, as I began to hear that, my religion is love, and then it took me to that spiritual, I began to ask myself, well, what's really behind this question? Because this word religion, unfortunately, has been vilified, if you will, in today's society, and I understand it, right? Because we're folks that identify as spiritual, not religious. That's actually what we know now through the Pew Research studies that continue to show us over and over again that more and more people are identifying as spiritual and not religious, because religion has been problematic. Yes, yes. Religion has done so many things on this planet. People have done so many things on this planet in the name of religion, and so it makes sense that we don't really want to identify with religion, right? And so what we're really talking about there is dogmas and creeds and rigidity and separation. That's what we don't want to agree with. But in truth, the word religion is actually a harmless word, right? Now, if we go to the roots of religion, we find a couple things. First, we have the word in Latin relego, which means to choose or to go over again, right? And then we have something that I learned from my wonderful teacher, Joseph Campbell, and we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell today. Relego or relegare, which means to bind or to connect or to reconnect. And I'm sure many of you've heard me talk about this idea that religion means to bind or to connect to something. And it's actually then akin or a synonym to the word yoga, because yoga means union. Same vibration, same meaning, essentially. And so then when we understand that religion is actually this word in its root and in the etymology, we're talking about to choose or go over again. We're talking about to bind, to connect, or to reconnect. When I hear the question, have you got good religion, what I hear is, what are you choosing and going over again and again? When I hear the question, have you got good religion, I'm hearing the question, what are you bound to? What are you connected to? What are you reconnecting to? And so as I heard these questions, I thought this is very profound and very important for us to entertain these questions as we're talking about God power. Because I recognize that these questions are critically important to the times that we're living in now. When we see the polarization, the separation, the otherness, the disagreements, it has everything to do with our religion. It has everything to do with what we're bound to, what we're connected to, and what we're choosing over and over again. Have you got good religion? In that case, no. Because we recognize we need to understand what it is that we're connecting ourselves to and what we're binding ourselves to, what we're checking, what we're choosing over and over again, because that in truth is our religion. And so I want to bring us back to this quote that we're using to anchor ourselves from Florence Scovel Shinn when she writes in The Power of the Spoken Word, when you have the fixed idea that there is only one power in the universe, God power, all appearance of evil will disappear from your world. And so when we hear that quote and when we hear that piece from the text that she wrote there, she's saying that once you're clear about what you're bound to, once you're clear about what you're connected to, once you're clear about what you're choosing over and over again, only then, that fixed idea, then you know that there's only one power, and then all appearance of evil will disappear from your world. But of course, this power, this thing that we call God, as I said a few weeks ago, the sum total of what we each individual believe is who and what God is to and for us. This is why everybody has a different God. This is why there are all these different religions and versions even within the religions, right? There are all these different versions of Christianity, all these different versions of Islam, all these different versions of Judaism, all these different ways of practicing Buddhism, all of these different versions and ways of practicing Hinduism, or the ways they kind of move, from Hinduism to Jainism, right? All of these different inflections and accents. Because the sum total of what any of us individually believe, that's who and what God is. And so as I was wrestling with these questions and hearing these questions in my mind, it took me to one of my anchoring teachers, Joseph Campbell. I love Joseph Campbell. and the conversations that he has with Bill Moyers in The Power of Myth. The Power of Myth is beautiful because it's a series of conversations that were recorded over the last 2 summers of Joseph Campbell's life. And this series has been shown over and over again, usually when any PBS station is doing a telethon and raising funds. This is one of the programs that they'll show over and over again. And it continues to inform me, it continues to teach me. And so I came back to this conversation in the second episode, and this is what Joseph Campbell says. Now, we are so engaged in doing things to achieve purposes of outer value that we forget the inner value, the rapture that is associated with being alive. It is what it's all about. Now, we want to think about God. God is a thought. God is a name. God is an idea, but its reference is to something that transcends all thinking. The ultimate mystery is beyond all categories of thought. My friend Heinrich Zimmer of years ago used to say, the best things can't be told because they transcend thought. The second best are misunderstood because those are the thoughts that are supposed to refer to that which can't be thought about, you know? And one gets stuck with the thoughts. The third best are what we talk about, you see, and myth is that field of reference, metaphors referring to what is absolutely transcendent. So this is interesting because this points us to what's happening in our world when we ask, what are we bound to? Some of us are bound to the best things that can't be told. Actually, that which is transcendent, which is really who and what God is. Again, God is a thought. God is a word. It's a reference. It's a pointer to something that can't be explained. I say this all the time. As soon as we say the word God, we've created a box. Because when I say God to you, it might mean that hellfire and brimstone God that you grew up with. When I say God to somebody else, that might actually mean the pantheon of gods in Greek mythology. If I say it to someone else, it might mean the pantheon of the Orishas. If I say God to somebody else, it might signify the pantheon of the gods and goddesses that we see within India, right? And so we recognize that word is pointing to something else. And ultimately, it's pointing to that which even can't be told. Because any words we put on it limits it. Any words that we put on it, it boxes it. And so for some of us, that is what we are bound to. That is what we are connected to. But for most of us, we're living in this second best. The second best are misunderstood because those are the thoughts that are supposed to refer to that which can't be thought about. And this is why religion gets us so messed up and so separated. Because as Joseph Campbell also says in Thou Art That, we're arguing over metaphors. It's all a metaphor. It's all a descriptor of something that can't be described. And that's what we're arguing over. A metaphor. Wars are being fought over a metaphor. People have been enslaved over a metaphor. People have been ostracized and called anything but a child of God because of a metaphor. And so when we look at this, when we look at the religious tension that we are seeing and experiencing, when we look at the political tension, when we look at the issues of social justice, the issues of human rights, when we look at the issues surrounding climate change, what I began to understand and see, because I've been wrestling with this over the past few weeks, is this tension that's here and so present and so visceral, particularly in this country right now, is we're experiencing the tension of the movement from the age of I believe to the age of I know. I speak of this so often, right? The age of I believe is the age of Jesus, the age of Pisces, the fish. Hence, Jesus is the fisher of men. And believing is wonderful. Believing can take us so long. But eventually, we got to know something for ourselves. We got to know it to be true. And what's happening right now, we see it, of course, myself, I see it within the religious circles and conversations and debates that I've been placed in. But we also see it within this country even politically. Because there's some things when we look at how we're wrestling with the NRA and we're wrestling with gun laws, it feels very practical, right? Some of the things that are being asked for, right? Actually, we know the studies are showing that the majority of Americans actually agree with what we would consider sensible gun reform. It's actually not a radical idea. This is according to the research studies that the majority of Americans, just like the majority of Americans did not vote for our current president, the majority of Americans actually agree with some sensible gun control. Not taking guns out of people's hands, but recognizing that there are certain types of guns that actually don't need to be in anyone's hands, right? There are certain types of guns, even this issue about the age limit, that if you have to be 21 to get a handgun, why don't you have to be 21 to get this automatic rifle that is causing so much violence and so much destruction? And so that seems very practical, right? But those of us that are holding that belief, we're living in the I know, right? Because we're looking at facts and research and logic, right? And so it's very hard to even understand how these people that are living in the I believe of life, not willing to shift and change, because the world has changed and the world is changing. In this same conversation here between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell, one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Campbell, he says that the virtues of our past become the vices of our present. And so what we recognize is that we have so many people that are trying to hold on to what may have been or what seemed to be for them, because not for all of us, seemed to be a virtuous idea for that time. Seemed to be a virtuous idea, even if we look at the idea of the Second Amendment and understanding that we had a militia and understanding that it was actually necessary for regular people to become part of the army. That then was a virtue for that time because we did not have the militaristic system that we have now. So it made sense that we needed to ensure that regular folks could have guns so that they could be a part of the militia. Okay? Virtue. That's not the case now. And so now as many are trying to hold on to that virtuous idea, it is now becoming a vice. Why? Because it is part of the reason that people who should not have these guns in their hands are getting them and causing violence and causing calamity. We're watching this tension between I believe and I know. There's overwhelming facts and research and understanding that hell is not a real place. Yes, it is a real experience, but it's not a real place. I was reading a dialogue, shout out to my dear brother, Pastor Michael Walrun up in Harlem, because he's been getting some heat lately because of some things that he said, but what was more interesting to me was the comments. That a lot of people were continually to defend this idea of hell and said that Jesus preached about hell. But what's so interesting is that just a little bit of study would show that actually Judaism doesn't teach hell. There is no hell within the theology of Judaism. So there's no way that Jesus as a Jew could have taught you're going to hell. It's simply impossible just based on a basic baseline study of Judaism and Judaism as it exists and as it was taught by Jesus at that time. And so essentially that's what he was saying. He was saying Jesus didn't even believe in hell. Because he couldn't have. Because that's not what Jews taught or believed. It doesn't exist. And so although this is factual, although anybody can get any number of books and read this and do the research for themselves because, as I always say, don't take my word for it, right? I'm saying this to you now. Go and read about it. Check out Love Wins by Rob Bell. He breaks it down very well, right? But as we recognize we have these books and these facts, it seems I know, this is just what is. But because we have so many people that are still living in the I believe of life, and because that's what they believed, and we believed down through the years, that old time religion, it was good enough for my mother, it was good enough for my father, it's good enough for me. But the tension of life is expanding. Life is evolving. Life is taking us somewhere else. It's taking us into this new age. And so this question of have you got good religion, we have to be clear about what are we binding ourselves to? What are we choosing over and over again? Because at every level of being, we're constantly being asked to choose. Are we still living in just the belief of life or the knowing of life? And when we move into the knowing of life, what things must we let go of in order to now live in the knowing? What superstitious beliefs? What old beliefs that might have worked for grandma and them, But it's not going to work for us today. And that's not a slight to grandma and them. Because we recognize that that was necessary for their time. That's why I love what Joseph Campbell says. It was a virtue. It was a virtue of the past. But now it becomes a vice, and we have to be willing to let go. And so, as we continue that conversation, and Joseph Campbell, he talks about the transcendent. And Bill Moyer says, right, the transcendent, it's what can't be known. It's what can't be named, except in our own feeble attempt to clothe it into language. And Joseph Campbell then says, the ultimate word in our language for that which is transcendent is God. And then he goes on to describe, there's a cave in a harbor outside of Bombay, or they said used Bombay at that time. You go into this cave, and what you find once your eyes adjust to the darkness or less light, you find this amazing mask, and it's actually 3 faces. Now, the center is called the mask of God. And this is even interesting, that the idea of the mask of God, you still can't see or know what this transcendent is, but this mask is a representation of that which is transcendent. But on either side of it, there are 2 other masks. And these masks represent duality. And they represent how we end up acting in life when we lose sight of the transcendent and when we lose sight of what we're connected to. And so he talks about it in this way. Whenever one moves out of the transcendent, one comes into the field of opposites. These 2 pairs of opposites come forth as male and female from the 2 sides. What has eaten of the tree of the knowledge, not only of good and evil, but of male and female, of right and wrong, of this and that, of light and dark. Everything in the field of time is dual, past and future, dead and alive. All this, being and non-being, is and isn't. And Bill Moyers says, and what's the significance of them being beside the mask of God, the mask of eternity? What is this sculpture saying to us? And Campbell goes on, the mask represents the middle, and the 2 represent the 2 opposites, and they always come in pairs. And put your mind in the middle. Most of us put our minds on the side of the good against what we think of as evil. Hear this, hear this. It was Heraclitus, I think, who said, for God, all things are good and right and just, but for man, some things are right and others are not. You're in the field of time when you're man or mankind, and one of the problems of life is to live in the realization of both terms. That is to say, I know the center, and I know that good and evil are simply temporal apparitions. I'm going to read that line again. It's very important. You're in the field of time when you're man, and one of the problems of life is to live in the realization of both terms. That is to say, I know the center, I know the transcendent, I know the middle way, and I know that good and evil are simply temporal apparitions. This is the truth of life. This is why the instruction was given in the mythological allegorical story about Adam and Eve to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was the recognition that if you eat of this tree, then you're going to be in separation. Inevitably, you're going to create separation. We know what happened. Adam and Eve, they covered themselves. They now saw themselves as being other and different, right? And then they also hid themselves from God. No longer did they recognize and realize their oneness with the all that is. And so we can recognize then that when we ask the question, have you got good religion? Which mask are you looking at? Are you choosing over and over again to keep your mind fixed on the center, to keep your mind fixed so that you don't get caught up in the world of opposites? Because what happens? Yes, we may affirm and say, I'm in the age of I know, and I'm in the age of logic, and I know what's really going on, and I know the right way. But then we start speaking about others as though they are not children of God as well. We begin to look at our brothers and sisters that didn't vote like us like there's something wrong with them. Yes, yes. And so we recognize that when we do that, we have taken our eyes off of the middle. We have taken our eyes off of the mask. And in truth, what have we chosen again? We're choosing opposites. We're choosing separation. We're choosing otherness. But the truth of the matter is, as Heraclitus says here, it is true that for God, all things are good and right and just. Because God recognizes that all things fade into one. At the end of the story, you win. So even the thing that feels like a challenge, even the thing that feels like it's wrong, even the thing that you can't understand why it's here, that thing will be used for your good. That was the wisdom in the story of Joseph. What some meant for evil, God used for good. That was the wisdom of the story. And Joseph went through hell. Hellish experiences. Sold into slavery by his brothers. Lied on. Thrown back in jail. He had the gift of interpreting dreams and thought that that would get him out of jail. Please remember me. They didn't remember him. But through all of that, he actually gained knowledge and experiences that we can look at the story from the end of the story and see how it was all perfect. And so that's the wisdom behind this idea that for God, all things are good and right and just. So as we are in this tension, and as I say we're in this tension of I believe to I know, we're moving into the age of I know. I mean, it's already happened. We're halfway on the other side of it. So there's no moving back. So when we understand that, then this is how we can stay in the middle way instead of moving into complaint and frustration. Some of us, our religion is complaining. We've made a religion over this past year of complaining about 45. Yes, yes? Or we've made a religion out of being obsessed about the soap opera that's taking place in the White House between the investigations and the drama and all that's happening and porn stars and all this stuff. Have you got good religion? What are you binding yourselves to? Because see, if we pay too much attention to that, it's going to move us. Our eyes are not going to be in the center. All of a sudden now we're going to be fussing and frustrated and scared and worrisome and doubting and not knowing what's going to happen. Have you got good religion? What are you choosing over and over again? As those that are spiritual people, as those of you that are spiritually minded, as you powerful metaphysicians, you understand the principle and you understand that the power of your focus is critical. So it is important that you choose love over and over again. It is important that you choose union, yoga over and over again. It is important that you choose that which brings us together, not that which separates us over and over again. It is important that you choose when you meet a stranger to find that place where you harmonize, find that place where you can agree, find that place where you can find love, because it is only out of that we can actually change what it is that we want to change in this world. Now, I want to leave you with two final things, quickly. One of the things that Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell do in their conversation that I love, because we recognize through the power of myth and through Joseph Campbell's teachings that we find these archetypal stories throughout every culture on the planet. Even though they weren't aware of each other at the time, we find these similarities. And again, as I was just saying, many times what so many minds do is focus on what's different. And so there's no way that there could be one story or one archetypal theme or multiple archetypal themes, because there are nuances and there are accents that are different. We understand that. But when we whittle it down, we start to see these beautiful comparisons. And so here, Bill Moyers is reading from Genesis, and Joseph Campbell follows with a piece from the Upanishads. And Bill Moyers reads Genesis 1, "And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good." And from the Upanishads, "Then he realized, I indeed am this creation, for I have poured it forth from myself. In that way, he became this creation. And verily, he who knows this becomes in this creation a creator." And Joseph Campbell says, that's the clincher there. When you know this, then you've identified with the creative principle yourself, which is God power in the world, which means in you it's beautiful. So I'll read it again. "Then he realized, indeed, I am this creation, for I have poured it forth from myself. And in that way he became this creation." This is the all that is, or the transcendent, or God speaking. "And verily, he or she who knows this becomes in this creation a creator." That's the clincher. That's God power. When you understand and know that that which created all things is in, through, and as you, then and only then do you become a creator in this space. Then and only then do you understand that I have the power to speak, and so it will be. Then and only then do you understand that you have the power to imagine, to visualize, to see it before you see it, and it shall be. And finally, this quote from Michelle Longo O'Donnell. Take a breath, y'all. It is not until our image of God is corrected that we begin to understand how we sabotage our own happiness. And so when we ask this question, have you got good religion? Maybe we're hearing the question and we realize that we need to correct our image of God. Our image of this thought, this transcendent. Again, these words, we can only place certain meaning on it based on our experience. But if your experience hasn't been loving, if your experience has been full of judgment, if your experience has been full of shame, if you're still kind of scared that you might go to hell when it's all said and done. I was watching a video of Reverend Ike doing a profound interview in the 60s, I believe it was. Late 60s. And one of the things he was saying was, with the old-time religion, people were being taught how to die. Right? That you live a certain way so you can die and go to heaven. But what we're interested in is we're teaching you how to live, because we recognize that you have the power, potential, and possibility to live a glorious life, to live a victorious life now. But that living starts with how we're thinking. And so whatever that thought about God is, that image, if it's not a loving God, if it's not a God that lives within you, that is as close to you as your breath, if it is not a God that is constantly cheering you on, if it is not a God that says, I love you as you are, if it is not a God that says, yes, you made a mistake, I still love you, if it is not a God that is unconditionally loving at all times, no matter what you're doing in your life, then it's time to correct it. I watched another interview, a group of ministers, this was deep to me, a group of ministers, pastors were lamenting over how Christianity is losing. Lamenting in the sense that they feel like the gospel has been watered down. And one of the ministers said, I heard someone say something echoing what I just said. I heard a minister, a prominent minister that you all know, said, no matter what you do, God still loves you. That's good news, isn't it? That feels good. That sounds good. No matter what you do, God still loves you. And he said, this is a problem. He said, we've taken out the wrath of God. He said, what need would there be for people to come to Jesus or to come to Christ if there's no wrath, if God's not angry anymore? And I said, praise God, good news, thank God. So we recognize that as we're moving through this tension, we have those that are arguing for the wrath of God. Now, I don't argue or debate with anyone, but I stand in the knowing that God is love and only love. And so with that, I invite everybody to stand. Let us correct and recorrect our image of God. And once we have corrected it, and we know who and what God is, that it is love itself and that it lives within us. As Jesus says, and it's right in the Bible, the canonized Bible, the kingdom of God is within you. Now, if we move out of the canon and we go to the Gnostic text, which I love, he says that if you say the kingdom of heaven is in the sky, then the birds precede you. If you say it is in the sea, then the fish precede you. But the truth is that the kingdom is within you and it is with all around you. Because we recognize that God is inherent in everything. And so we recognize that when we understand that God is inherent in everything, this would then even inform our policies as it pertains to climate change. One of the issues when we look at the depths of how the Garden of Eden story has moved us into a place of thinking that nature is bad and wrong, of course then we get a society where we're willing to just pollute nature and pollute everything, because there's an underlying theology that says that nature is bad and wrong and God is separate from nature. And so we got to heal that story. In this conversation, Joseph Campbell talks about, we hear cynicism when people speak of the fertility religions or the nature religions. But we recognize that we need to come back to the nature religions because our indigenous brothers and sisters understood something very powerful about how to work with the land. and how to honor the divinity within the land and within every animal and within every plant and every being, and the divinity in the sky and the divinity in the clouds and the divinity in the sun and the divinity of the moon and the stars. So as we correct this image of God, not only we are correcting it within ourselves, but then we're correcting and we begin to correct how we interact with all life. That's how we shift our policies in this nation. Because we keep changing laws and it hasn't worked. Because we have not changed our consciousness. We have not changed the fundamental assumptions that most human beings have about life. And so here and now, we have this opportunity. We take a breath in and we release. Mother, Father, God, I am so grateful and thankful for good religion. I am so grateful for this good connection that we have with, to, and through you. I am so grateful and thankful to choose over and over again that which is loving, that which is fruitful, that which binds us all together, that which is unifying, that which is harmonious. I am so grateful and thankful to be here in a place, in a space that is a beacon of light. Celebration Spiritual Center is designed and here to celebrate the magnificence and the significance of God in you, as you, through you, and all around you. As Pastor Yolanda says, there is nothing but God, and it is good. And so as we have united our minds together in consciousness, we are choosing to know and embody this truth, recognizing that when you know something, you don't have to argue for it. Recognizing that when you know something, you don't have to debate about it, but you stand in the absolute truth of it. You stand as a mighty fortress that is not deterred or knocked down by the winds and the waves because it was built on a sure foundation. We recognize that we have a sure foundation. We recognize that we are supported by life. We are supported by ancient wisdom, and we are supported by present wisdom. So no longer do we take our eyes off of the middle way. No longer do we get caught up in the duality and the separation and the polarization and the otherness, because we know that its time is winding up. We know that simply all we are seeing right now is that tension, is that those last little fingers holding on to these old ideas that cannot live anymore. We know it because we've seen our children standing up on this week. We know it because we are seeing the young people speaking out with authority, speaking out from a knowingness, and we recognize and we hear the wisdom of, man, a child shall lead them. So we allow them to lead us. We allow them to lead us into a new world. We allow them to lead us into the beloved community. We allow them to lead us into a place of unity. We allow them to lead us into a place of harmony. The shift has already taken place. And we are choosing not to fight the current, but to ride on with it. For this truth, I am so very grateful. I release this prayer now with joy and thanksgiving. And together we say, amen, amen. Ashe. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, God.